Welcome to Deep Tech Dive, where we do a deep dive analysis on the latest and greatest. And today is no exception, where we have the Venom 15 Phantom fresh out of the box, the first one in the country. And we're going to do a thorough analysis of exactly what it's good for, how it works, and how it can benefit you. It's great to be back. My name is Michael Fury and I'm from Deep Tech Dive. So if you haven't already seen my first in-depth review, which we did on the Venom BlackBook Zero 14 Phantom, please do so. It's an hour and 41 minutes of deep diving into what I think is one of the best 14-inch ultra portable laptops out there. Now don't worry, there's heaps of chapter timestamps, so you can click forward and you don't need to listen to me drone on for that whole time. But this is the type of in-depth review we really like, and don't forget to subscribe if this is your kind of flavor too. Now, the more you show the love here, the more of these and the type of long format, in-depth reviews we'll actually be able to do. So the support is greatly appreciated, and the team and I thank you so much for showing it. I covered a lot about Venom in the previous video, and especially why and what Venom does, not only just the products that they make, but also the company itself. And I always feel that the product that a company makes is almost secondary to what the company is about, because the core competency of a company from a product standpoint, I think is extremely important. And the flow-on effect of that, what the company believes, will ultimately affect how you experience the products that it creates, because it's the interaction of the various companies, departments, that determines the outcome of basically the product and how it's going to be consumed in the world. Does that make sense? So there's a lot of companies that just simply make things because, well, that's what they do. They make stuff. Now, and I always feel a little bit kind of lost in there, because even though the product may be good, the after-sales support, availability of parts, or even the upgrades, or even the overall integration and actual purpose of the product and what it was supposed to do or even solve, just kind of gets a bit lost. So this is why I truly believe that a Deep Tech Dive, that Venom was a very meaningful as our kind of a first video, because they make really fast, high-performance notebook computers, and not just mouse pads or phones or rice cookers or whatever, right? Or internet streaming services. They are just on computers. Ultimately, Venom is about successful people doing successful things. And in today's world, where work is where you open your laptop, I cannot think of a more important device. So if that means something to you and you want to work really well and to the best of your ability, wherever that is, Venom ultimately is a great choice when it comes to that. Now, as an owner of a Venom BlackBook already, I felt I needed to do a deep dive into the new product. And guess what? Well, Venom reached out to me and basically said, yeah, we'd love you to do this brand new one. So the all new 2022 Venom BlackBook Zero 15 Phantom. Quite a mouthful, but one hell of a computer. Now, at the time of filming, I'm actually lucky to be the first one in the world to have the privilege of filming this one. Now, it seems that someone likes my coverage. So look, the prices start from $12.99 US, $22.99 AUD, and you can see the other prices up there on the screen in probably your local currencies. Now, you can purchase this in 6 native currencies. Shipping is completely free worldwide and provided by DHL, super kind of speedy delivery there. And basically all the currencies are the same, and so you can the pricing is the same whatever currency you buy it. Now, quick recap on what Venom BlackBooks are all about, as it's super important just to get this bit. So Venom's been making high performance notebook computers for a while now. So they're called the BlackBook since 2010, and there are 2 distinct families in the BlackBook lineup. So there's the BlackBook Zero range, ultra portables for business and productivity, and then you've got the BlackBook Pro range, so the muscle books, the desktop replacements that have 3D rendering capability. So the BlackBook Pros are built primarily around the GPU and the graphics processing unit, and the BlackBook Zeros are built primarily around the CPU. So there's 2 fundamentally kind of very different designs, and most users will require a BlackBook Zero, which is what I'm actually covering today. You'll find that about 95% of users will not require a dedicated graphics card on the board. Consumers for the last 25 to 30 years, we've been taught to look at the computer performance from almost like a linear fashion. You know, that's spoken to us by kind of key component manufacturers like Intel and AMD. Secondly, it's also been a linear message, mainly because it's an easy message to communicate, you know, and it simply sells. So this is very similar to how like larger engines in cars no longer directly correlate to vehicles with more horsepower, say, and you know, performance. So the performance gains are like coming from things that are like difficult to actually measure in a manner where a bigger corresponding number does not simply mean it's going to be more power. So, you know, like today's V8s does not mean more power than a V6 or even a four-cylinder engine, right? So we've separated the zeros and the pros. But ultimately we're going to look at what's the difference between the 014 Phantom and the 015 Phantom. And I think that's probably the best aspect to cover, especially since the first deep dive I did went for nearly 2 hours on the 014 Phantom. So if you've already watched the 014 Phantom video or you're familiar with it, this will make a lot of sense. Essentially then, the internal wise is exactly the same animal, except the 015 Phantom can support up to 64 gigabytes of RAM and has a few more other ports. Other than that, the speed and the tech wise, you're looking at the same high level performance. The 015, as the name suggests, is bigger. It's also heavier and has a slightly different purpose. It's more of a, like, I work all day on a laptop sort of kind of size. So don't get me wrong, 5 years ago, this weight and size would have been basically an ultra light book. It's 400 grams, so 14 ounces heavier than a MacBook Air. So 1.7 kilograms, yeah, that's really nothing at all, right? So imagine a MacBook Air, put a steak on top, and there you are, you got it. So now the MacBook Pro is 400 grams or 14 ounces heavier than the BlackBook 015 Phantom. So it's smack bang in the middle between the MacBook Pro and the MacBook Air. And surprisingly, this is where I would also put it from a performance perspective as well. You know, somewhere in those kind of aspects, the Zero is still more powerful than the MacBook Pro. Considering the MacBook Pro is 2.15 kilograms or 4.7 pounds, this really isn't very heavy at all. You know, you do have to remember though, that the BlackBook 014 Phantom is ridiculously 1 kilogram or 2.2 pounds that I'm comparing it to here. So while yes, it's good, it's ultimately a league of its own. So let's put the BlackBook Zero range overall then right in between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, both price and performance wise. And from what I can tell, the BlackBook Pro sits above the MacBook Pro. So maybe I'll be covering the BlackBook Pro soon enough too. Now, the BlackBook 014 Phantom is actually a 13-inch laptop with a 14-inch screen. So it can achieve this through the zero bezels or narrow bezels. And the BlackBook 0 or 15 Phantom is actually more of a 14-inch notebook with a 15-inch screen. So check out those bezels. Like, it's a zero bezel around all four corners. How cool. Speaking on the screens, why don't we start there? So the 014 Phantom and the 015 Phantom share the same technology in their screen, but the 15 is obviously just bigger. Now, LPDT, or low power display technology, is a type of tech that Intel co-developed starting back in 2018 with various other screen manufacturers like Sharp and some others. Now, this is a type of tech that is in both the 14 and the 15, so 014 Phantom. Now, LPDT consumes about 50% less power than a typical panel's backlight power draw. Going from 3 watts to 1.5 watt extends your battery life by about 4 to 8 hours. And this is how, with the right power optimization, you can literally get up to 17 hours of battery life on the 015 Phantom. Now, I would say usable hours are more like kind of 12, but this is plenty of much work for a work from anywhere kind of size laptop. So the power consumption on the 015 Phantom screen is 1.65 watts. This low power display tech isn't a standalone kind of type of technology that is kind of being marketed as another feature. It's just kind of getting lumped in with Intel based processors, especially having a longer life battery technology. LPDT is only available on the Zero range because the technology only works with the Intel UG line processor, which runs on the 15 to 28 watts. And I'm not going to go into the processors in this one too much because I covered extensively in the previous video about the 14 Phantom. So it's exactly the same processor though in this one. So check out the other video and skip to that chapter if you want to know more and a deep dive onto the processors in the computers. Now, another important factor to mention here is that with the AMD processors, when unplugged from a mains power supply, you will lose up to 50% performance. The CPU really gets cut back. And this is so that AMD-based laptops can still boast good battery lives. And it's also why you'll still only see AMD-based laptops in at most mid to high-end laptop computers, but never at the top end of the performance tab. And because at the top end, like Venom say, everything is important, including the battery life, since a screen is what draws most of the power in an ultra portable. It's important, super important, to look at this type of technology and what's behind it. So a higher resolution than the FHD, which is 1920 by 1080p resolution on a 15-inch ultra portable, is also kind of pointless because you can't really tell the difference, right? Because 4000 or 4K in this screen size and with the inbuilt graphics card, you're not going to be doing CGI on a movie either. So it makes no sense other than having a high sounding spec on paper. And look, manufacturers put 4K panels on these ultra portables for the purposes of catching your attention and making you ultimately to pay for something which you cannot really fully use. And in fact, they give you an overall worse experience. Now, not only are you not going to really use it or be able to notice it for productivity and like a lot of games, the power draw on a 4K panel is going to make your ultra portable not so ultra portable. So counterintuitive, right? So this is what I love about Venom. It's always about what the customer benefits the most from, not what sounds good, not what's best on paper, it's what actually works. So if you require a 4K native panel, then you most likely require a serious graphics processor to go along with it. And because of that, you're going to be doing more than just casual gaming or photography or even video editing and like office productivity. You are into 4K video editing with graphical simulations and add-ons as well. Perhaps 4K gaming, then for that I would look at the BlackBook Pros, not this one. Now remember, just because the screen on the BlackBook Zero 15 Phantom isn't a 4K display, it doesn't mean you can't plug in the two 4K external screens into the BlackBook and then run them, if that's exactly what you want to do, for example. So, you might be working on photos or something that's been taken in 4K. So it makes sense to be able to view it on 32-inch or 34-inch desktop monitors in 4K, and that's exactly what you can do as well. So the screen on the Zero Phantom also cover 100% of the sRGB color spectrum. So standard red, green and blue sRGB means that colors displayed on different devices and in various programs will be the same identical color on these various devices. So you've got a decent screen if you can cover this color spectrum. And look, Adobe RGB has a wide color gamut as compared to kind of sRGB, which means there are more colors to choose from ultimately, especially in the former. So case in point then, if you've captured an image with a camera that uses Adobe RGB and then viewed the same image on an sRGB display, what you see displayed will have missing colors that basically fall outside the color model. So if you view photos on a monitor with narrow color space, you'll have a muddier and less vivid colors. So most people don't have an Adobe RGB camera, and so if you do, you need to look at the BlackBook Pro range rather than this one. So professional level monitors have expansive color spaces for more vibrant and detailed photos. When you're comparing, look out for displays with at least 90% sRGB best for displaying basically your work on the web, and then 70% Adobe RGB coverage, ideal for printed images. So typically you can take about 10 to 20% off the sRGB number to get the Adobe RGB number as a general kind of rule of thumb. So the BlackBook Phantom range exceeds this at 100% sRGB. And unless you own a professional photo studio, this is going to be more than enough for most people, especially photography, work, gaming, and it might even be some graphic design that you're doing for your business as well. We're talking about like brilliant colors and like beautiful blacks, like really deep, beautiful, and to me also means like non-reflective display, especially if you're wearing glasses. The Venom Vision Anti-Glare standard means that the screen is a matte and non-reflective panel. So this is probably my major pet hate on touchscreens, so like my iPad, because with a touchscreen, you have to kind of have the touch filament layer within the panel assembly. And look, it's this layer that can be something seen as a grid, like a structure within the panel itself, if the reflective coating on the top layer does not necessarily block out the visibility. And so you may, on some really cheap touchscreens, under specific light conditions, actually be able to see the touch filament grid. Now, to make sure you can't see this grid, manufacturers make the screen layer that sits on top of this touch kind of matrix grid a reflective piece of glass or material so that you can't see the grid that sits under it. Another factor is also that the screen gets fingerprints all over it, especially when you're kind of doing some work. So it gets touched a lot, and the natural oils that kind of humans produce on their skin transfers over to the panel, leaving you guessed it, fingerprints. And to minimize this, then touchscreens also get like a phobic coating over the surface of the top layer of the touchscreen display, so that the surface can wick away the oils and minimize the fingerprints too. The downside to all of this is that you get to look at your moving mugshot all day long, and this can be painful if like the office lights are not right or you're outside, and it's a really horrible way to work, especially after an hour of staring at yourself. Unless, of course, that you're as pleasurable to look at as moi, or you're a narcissist, or maybe just both. So, not to mention if you wear glasses as well, I'm told that the reflection is even worse in that scenario. Now, the screen is really beautiful to look at, and I truly enjoy staring at it and just having this kind of sort of battery life, the kind of speed and the performance all coupled with the screen which displays awesomely. It's kind of like magic, right? Now, while we're on the screen, I really want to talk about the biometric facial recognition, so found within the actual Venom BlackBook Zero 15 Phantom. This tech works with Windows Hello, and if you look closely at the top of the screen, you can see two actual cameras. So the area, by the way, is not a notch within the screen panel, while Apple is pushing the notch as a purposefully beautiful on the new MacBook Pro. I think the notch in the new MacBook Pro looks terrible, ultimately. It's obviously space they need for future development, and they're planning to maybe possibly some type of augmented reality for the metaverse, which we're hearing about. But why Apple do it now? They keep telling us it's amazing. It isn't, because it's in the middle of the top section of your desktop, and it will make a massive difference in those kind of moments when it really kind of counts. Because if you're going to be looking at some sort of image that has something right there, because they treat the notch as if it's not there, the image-wise, it will visually actually impact it. So really not great. So Venom's gone with integrating it into the actual top part of the bezel. So making it sit above the display, out the way, and with it coming out a little bit on the top and going back down, as opposed to eating into that kind of precious screen space. Within the area, it's actually got a high definition webcam, and you'll be using that for all of those kind of Teams meetings or Zoom calls and Google conferences that you might be on. And the joys of working from everywhere except the office is right here. So there's also the dual array microphone, and that ensures your voice is recorded in stereo, so the person listening to you on, say, a headset, for example, can hear your voice from both the left and the right hand side in the same sort of way as if they were like literally sitting in front of you. And so each mic records your voice in the same way, left and right, and this helps produce basically better natural sound for the video calls. The other camera found within this area is a special one, an infrared camera in fact, which is pretty cool when you think about infrared cameras being tens of thousands of dollars just a few years back and still being in a couple of thousands today. So while they're not the same type of cam that you can see over there to go and go UFO hunting, or like what we used when I was in the army, this infrared cam basically means you can trick the biometric camera with a 2D image, like a printed photo of yourself. So the purpose of this camera then is to make sure certain passwords and websites and the like accessible within your face without you actually having to gesture or remember kind of passwords. So in today's world where you could potentially have hundreds of passwords, this is a super exciting feature to have, and you really should start to utilize it, but you may have security concerns, right? And you really should. So now, remember with Venom, your data stays yours. So Venom have a very simple principle, your data belongs to you. It's not complicated, it's very, very, very straightforward. Because arguably it shouldn't be a complicated issue. You shouldn't have to read 54 pages of a T's and C's document to know what really happens to your data. I mean, who actually reads that stuff? I think manufacturers know this, and you can read more about Venom's approach to privacy and your data on the shopvenom.com website. But basically your data is yours and it's pretty clear. Your facial data points and all that facial recognition on data stays within the BlackBook on the BlackBook computer. So no server, no cloud, or even on the internet, it just stays on your computer that you're working off. So Microsoft gets to have access to your biometric data, but that isn't supposed to be the norm on all the devices? Now, it isn't, however, and so it is with the Venom BlackBooks. So on that, your data belonging to you, it's super important that when you buy a BlackBook, you register separately with their support portal via Venom helpdesk.com, because purchases bought through shopvenom.com, while it's all Venom, the sales division does not share information with the support division. This means you can buy presents for that special someone anonymously or for a customer or whoever, and that data is not cross-shared. So make sure you register your BlackBook on the Venom helpdesk.com, because that same privacy can be your undoing if you're trying to prove ownership for warranty claims or tech support. Just do it once and you don't have to worry about it down the track. And when you turn your BlackBook on for the first time, it will literally prompt you to do that. So remember now, Venom says you're covered for a fair and reasonable time, which is about, roughly speaking, 3 years. So make use of it. And don't forget Venom's notoriously disruptive global trading program. So as part of their take on the circular economy and what they view as being truly sustainable, it's a hard one to argue against, right? Use this BlackBook for up to 7 years, make sure it kind of turns on and is in good nick, and you can trade it in for cash up to 30 days after purchasing your new BlackBook. So as long as it literally turns on and it boots into Windows. So this post-purchase trading gives you the time to move your data across into your new BlackBook, and you're paid cash, not a store credit. The idea is that your customer or the customer today becomes their supplier tomorrow, which I think is super cool. So more info on why and what this all is all about is actually on the Shop Venom website. And we'll actually do a video later on the circular economy and the sustainability as a topic alone, because it serves a massive amount of coverage, especially when we consider that e-waste is due to increase by about 50% over the next 10 to 15 years, according to the World Economic Forum. Going back to the screen, you can see when you open the lid to about 90 degrees, the unit stays flat. However, this angle is not going to be the angle you use when it comes to actually using the laptop as a human. So when you're all lined up, the ergonomics of your seating position requires the screen to be tilted back a bit. So, that's your vision's going to be perpendicular to the screen at that point. So, you're going to sit at between 100 to 135 degrees, somewhere around there, depending on the height of the top part of your torso. So when you're seated, it will need to change again if you're kind of standing at a bench or something like that. So, something happens here when you tilt past 90 degrees, and that the keyboard actually lifts a little bit. And it generates an angle on the keyboard by about 10 to 20 degrees. This, ergonomically speaking, makes it like a delight to type on. So I sit at the screen about 110 degrees, which kind of gives me a 10 to 15 degree slant on the keyboard. And this soft slant allows you to sit the MacBook about 30 centimeters back on the desk and put your elbows on the actual desk itself while you have enough height while compensating for the thickness of your arm, right? So this may not sound like anything important. However, if you're slugging away at the keyboard every day for extended hours, it really makes literally all the difference. So, you're not typing down if you ever type for a prolonged period of time on a flat keyboard that has no angle. Sometimes you can get pain in your wrists or in your arms, and that angle is a little unnatural. So think like when you write with a pen, you don't hold the bottom of the pen closest to the point that makes contact with the paper, right? You hold it about 1 inch to 1.5 inches up. So that side of your hand can actually lay flat on the table while you write. A similar principle applies here, right? So making the keyboard a delight to type on for an extended amount of time. The keys are fresh and responsive and are great for quick typing on a prolonged period of time with minimal to almost no bounce on the chassis, depending on if you're a keyboard smasher or not, of course. So, having a numeric keypad on a device is also super helpful on an ultra portable and a godsend if you play around with numbers and use Excel spreadsheets. This is a definite must for someone like you. Especially I think end of financial year budgets, reports or data entry is never going to get better than this, and it's a must for anyone serious about inputting numeric data. You can adjust also the brightness of the keyboard by pressing Function plus or minus on the numeric keypad with 5 levels of brightness from no illumination to fully illuminated keys. There's a pleasant surprise here as well. So if you launch the control center and you have access to some other kind of great options that you can also control and kind of customize the experience that you want. So let's start with the LED keyboard interface. As it kind of suggests, it gives you options to play with, the keyboard's illumination settings. Lo and behold, we have color. 23 different colors. And while Venom overall is very stealthy and kind of minimalistic and kind of the standard factory install out of the box is preset to a white light blue color, you can choose hot neon pink, fire red, poison apple, burnt Lamborghini like an orange or a plush purple, bumblebee yellow, and almost different shades in between. So, depending on your moods and your preference or even what you're wearing that day. So of course, the standard office bluish white isn't going to offend anyone. And remember, you can turn it all off if you want. So you don't have to be stuck with anything. There's also the illumination dim setting in there as a timer too. So you can set the keyboard light on timer if you wish for the color to switch after a set amount of time or something like that. So, you haven't been able to figure out a usage scenario for this option. Maybe you can let me know, because I'm kind of curious to know as well. Now, the illuminated keyboard function is a crucial feature for a dedicated typist who, have something to say, as it allows you to basically operate in various lighting conditions. And maybe keep your partner next to you happier in a dark room, as an example, or just allow you to work on a plane, next to a sleeping child or a passenger or someone who's kind of maybe doing a presentation in a dark room, so you can kind of still work away in kind of stealth mode. You know, there are heaps of other keyboard shortcuts that we'll go through in a second, which make it accessible via the function key. So you can access PDF documents via the Venom Support and Control Center app that comes pre-installed. And the icon is the snake monogram that sits in the tray in your taskbar. So on the bottom right-hand side near the actual clock. By clicking on this, you can shortcut to the Venom help desk and register my Venom window, which allows you to actually register for Venom support and the setup guide. The power setting window, which will give you kind of 3 preset options that control Windows power settings at a software level. The asset information on the icon will also tell you what your serial number is, so that you can register your BlackBook, and then options tab, which will allow you to even choose if you want this application to load when you kind of load, will start the computer, or where it will sit as an info tab, which will basically explain in detail what each option actually is. So look, it's a pretty nifty and extremely light on system resource text-based app that kind of uses little to no system resources to run it. So really kind of helpful just to have there. If you click the setup guide on page 2, it's also a diagram called the keyboard hotkeys diagram. Here you can actually see the shortcuts function. F1 just basically disables the touchpad, and you may want to do this if you use an external mouse, or you kind of rest your hand on the touchpad often and don't want it to input any kind of specific commands. Function F2 switches the screen off, and again, handy if someone comes around or you don't want them to kind of see what you're up to on the screen, or you just want to use an external screen and have that only rather than the actual computer screen. Function F3 cuts all the audio. Function F5 decreases the audio sound, and function F6 increases the audio. Function F7 controls what your external displays are doing. And if you want the image on your screen duplicated or extended, or one of them or the other or both, it gives you that flexibility. Function F8 decreases the screen brightness, and F9 actually increases it. Function F10 will toggle the webcam on and off at the hardware level. So if you're paranoid that you're being watched, it's super helpful. You can literally just turn it off. Function F11 is what you call kind of apocalypse mode, where you're in flight mode or it kills all the wireless signals. It's also another way to get max battery life if you're working locally, say with no external network, or the internet connection is not even needed. Function F12 will put your system to sleep perfectly for you if you need to quickly attend to something else and kind of save the battery. Notable mention also needs to go to the minus symbol on the keypad. There's the asterisk. When you kind of press function asterisk, you can toggle keyboard's illumination onto like fully off or fully on. And the function / on the keypad will also launch the LED keyboard setting interface, giving you that access to 23 colors straight away. Now onto the touchpad, and here we have a much larger touchpad. It's a Microsoft Precision touchpad, which is really, really cool. And so probably worth covering this because I got this actually from How To Geek, so credit to them for this next bit. But traditionally, Windows PC touchpads were implemented in a more kind of one-off way. When you moved your finger across the actual touchpad, the touchpad driver has to look at the input and convert it to a mouse input. The touchpad basically appears then as a normal external mouse, either like a USB or a PS2 kind of mouse to Windows itself. PC manufacturers then have to tune the touchpad for their hardware, and the driver is basically responsible for handling the input. If the touchpad uses multi-finger gestures or has a palm rejection support, so you don't have accidental movements or kind of when you cursor while you're kind of typing, this all has to be implemented by the touchpad driver. Microsoft basically decided to move towards a more standard approach, starting with Windows 8.1. And this is when it created the Precision Touchpad specification, basically along with the touchpad company Synaptics. A PC with a Precision Touchpad doesn't do all the hard work on its own, especially in its hardware drivers. Instead, it sends the raw touchpad data to Windows itself. So this means that Windows is responsible for reading the input and processing the gestures. So Windows understands that your PC has a touchpad and the approach, basically approaches it in intelligent fashion. So the touchpad doesn't just pretend to be a normal kind of mouse that you're moving around, but why does that even matter? Well, a precision touchpad has some notable advantages and can actually get better over time. So as Microsoft improves Windows and its touchpad support, improvements can also benefit all the devices with a precision touchpad. Devices with normal touchpads will continue to stay the same. So if there's any bugs, the laptop manufacturers won't work on updating or even fine-tuning these old drivers. Microsoft also added the new four-finger gestures in the anniversary update for the example, but you'll only get these if your Windows 10 PC has a precision touchpad. Because precision touchpads are also standard in these computers, they can customize from the standard configuration screen at the settings, then onto devices, and then onto the mouse and touchpad screen. So if you don't have a precision touchpad in your PC, you'll actually see many fewer options here. And if you do have a precision touchpad, you'll see the text, your PC has a precision touchpad. So along with all the other useful options for configuring your touchpad and its gestures that you'd expect. Within the touchpad is also a secure biometric reader. So if you wear a hat or glasses, or the idea of facial recognition just freaks you out, then put simply, there's a secondary login approach, right? So to this day, fingerprint recognition remains the most specific when it comes to verifying someone's identity. And so it's also the most secure. So every human in the world has different features, but nothing varies more than a fingerprint pattern itself. So it's hard to recreate, rendering it a quite secure method and one of the safest systems you can get. So if you want to deploy the BlackBook to staff, for example, you can actually guarantee that with facial recognition on the person's identity, basically established to access a file, and then to confirm that, certain sections of a document have been read or agreed to, just cited, have them then press their fingerprint into the reader on the touchpad. So some great creative options there. And having the combination of the two for security, military, maybe OH&S or something like that has serious legal implications, can be worked on in a way that digitally and remotely, where you can establish that a user has actually read, seen and understood the document that you've sent. So there's a true next level methods that could be employed with the right type of software and also the infrastructure. As an example, DocuSign supports biometric signatures, so you can really play around with how you would want legal agreements signed and sealed and even delivered at a simple level, pretty much instantly, right? Companies like DocuSign offer small businesses the same sort of infrastructure that large firms use. And so, in fact, companies like Microsoft now and Intel use DocuSign themselves for their staff, partners and suppliers and customers. So I want to talk about how this BlackBook then feels, because it's different to the 014 Phantom, which is a magnesium alloy. Magnesium alloys are 30% lighter than the aluminium. However, they are not as rigid, and so that's why there's a bit of a flex in the 014 Phantom, and it's meant to be like that simply because due to the lightweight material, it gives you that, that's the advantage. So, however, in a 15-inch like this one, it's a bit larger, and the flex would have just basically made the unit intolerable. So, it's made of a 6000 series aluminium, which is alloyed with magnesium and silicon. So it feels really, really solid. And they're much harder than that magnesium. But the material is aluminium. So it feels really lovely. And look, this type of aluminium is very important in aerospace manufacturing. So they're lighter than the other magnesium alloys, but more rigid. And so, straight out the magnesium alloys, very, very powerful. So, it's coated in a max stealth carbon like black. So, you need to be careful if you're going to scratch it, of course, but it also comes with a really handy velvet case, which Venom actually put in the box. And so, this velvet case gives you, or allows you to get rid of the fingerprints and make sure you don't scratch it. Interestingly, Venom used this same kind of Velcro that was used on NASA's missions. Now, personally, I don't really like the Velcro because it's a bit on the noisy side, as you can hear, but it's quick, right? And it's strong as well. So, it's just something a bit different, and it's a small thing, right? Sometimes you have a zip, but they've gone for Velcro. Now, the fun fact about the actual velvet is that it was used throughout history, basically as early as 2000 BC in Egypt mainly, and it was mainly accessible only to royalty until about the 16th century. And it was during the Renaissance where it basically peaked. Now, the Industrial Revolution then allowed for the production of velvet to be improved and accessible to the masses. And this is from the 1900s onwards, and gradually made its way into everything. Venom says the choice of velvet was very deliberate because it was this kind of glamorous royal material which feels really kind of luxe and became democratized and available to the masses. And the same way that the first computers were not really accessible to the masses until the kind of Silicon Valley manufacturing revolution in the 70s and the 80s basically made it accessible to humans everywhere. And Venom's birth story mirrors this, as in their early days, Venom exclusively only made computers for engineers, architects and then designers that needed lots of computational power for extremely large projects, carrying price tags like 15 to 25 grand, per a single PC. And it was these kind of same customers who needed some sort of kind of extreme performance from their computing, and features like that basically migrated into affordable performance machines, and that was ultimately the birth of the Venom BlackBook. High performance notebooks that you can actually purchase and use for everyday use, which I think is super cool. Now, I personally love this story because the origins are literally in the very fabric, no pun intended, of the company. And it's not even mentioned anywhere unless you literally sit in front of them and ask them about how it all started. And look, it's a subtle non-verbal message that I think communicates a really powerful story. And it's that simple looking case, which is about empowerment, about access to information, about doing it better, and then kind of just generally improving the condition of mankind, through the generations, which is, I think that's really cool, and kind of like going from only being able to eat porridge to avocado on toast or something like that. It's like the democratization of nice things or really powerful, and it is awesome. It comes down to that intelligent performance slogan that they always promote. And it also about the snake logo, which you see here. I'm not sure if you know the story, but it represents knowledge as Venom's basically the snake is from eons ago. It's linked to mythology around the symbol for medicine, and then it can be used for either good or bad, just like a computer can be. And being an Australian company from the state of Victoria where all the snakes are venomous, it's ultimately the perfect fit. And there's also another message behind that logo, which when I was talking to the founder, John, he was talking about, there are extremely successful retail company that he used to run, sold over 1 million machines, and he would continually be asked by his close friends and kind of key accounts, basically, is this a good laptop that they're about to buy? And his answer apparently was always, it's good for the price. And that answer apparently gnawed at his mind and kind of consciousness, because he felt like the answer was never really answering the actual question. It was conditional. And it was good for the price isn't necessarily mean it's any good, if that makes sense. And in the back of his mind ultimately was something that kind of grew and that he wanted to address. So basically one day he just decided to do it, right? He just said, let's get on with it and do it ourselves. Let's build a great computer. And when he said this to his suppliers and the people around him, of course, as you can expect, people told him that he was crazy. and he'd lost his mind, and especially that he'd never be able to take on the big guns, you know, like HP and Dell and Apple. Imagine taking those guys on, right? But he basically turned to nature and saw that much faster, stronger animals could in fact basically be defeated by much smaller, venomous creatures. And that nature's kind of greatest bioweapon was actually venom. And so this kind of spoke to him in volumes, as it also mirrored what his customers were trying to achieve. They wanted supercomputing power, localized, and for prices that were not the same as the house or a car. You know, the combination of Venom's historical use, you know, its use in the natural world, and the fact that all the snakes in his home state were venomous was the perfect fit. So tell me a better brand with its logo origin story than that, and the one that kind of continues to honor the products that makes and sells. You know, and that brings me to the performance of how quick this beast is. Take a look at this chart. It's the exact same processor as what's in the 014 Phantom that I reviewed, and you know, but now we can compare it with Apple's M1 Max, which just came out, and is the processor that sits above the M1 Pro and is supposed to be their absolute flagship processor. This comparison is using the sign bench, and you can see here that the processor that comes in the brand new MacBook Pro with a whopping starting price of $3,000 or kind of 3,899 Canadian, or even 4,649 Aussie, is performing not even as half as good that is in the Venom BlackBook 014 Phantom, or the 015 Phantom that starts at around $14.99 USD, half the price, and you know, the same similar in Canadian and Aussie dollars. I'll put those on the screen. You know, and I know Venom gets some criticism for being perceived to be, you know, an expensive computer. However, it's not expensive, it's just not cheap, and it offers incredible value. And you know, how about another benchmark, right? This time I'll compare it with the new Apple M1 Pro processor, which sits below the M1 Max. The results will be pretty obvious. Now, I'm not going to go on about the benchmarks, basically because A, you can get them from anywhere and do them kind of yourself. B, they rarely reflect any real world usage scenarios to begin with, right? And C, most importantly, it's just measuring one singular aspect. So the BlackBook 015 Phantom is made up of much more than just a fantastic processor. And I thought it's good to see these though, because there is so much hype, especially right now, about, you know, everyone seems to be ignoring the facts. And so, you know, remember with the processors that single thread ones like what Intel create basically means fewer but much faster cores, which equal more predictable, consistently high performance across a wide range of kind of apps and games. Multi-thread processors like AMD, much more but slower cores, so theoretically better for a fewer number of apps that are basically perfectly threaded, like video editing as an example, but potluck for gaming. So, you know, I spent around half an hour on the previous video going into processors around the BlackBook 14 Phantom review. So if you want to know more about that, head over to that video if you want a deeper dive. So the 015 Phantom then is basically the fastest commercially available SSD in the world. You know, it's the Samsung OEM SSD for manufacturers. And so that's the newest kind of the top tier performance, with the Gen 4 delivering sequential speeds of 7,000 megabytes per second. So a 50% increase. And then there's the random read speeds also improving by about the same margin to 1000K IOPs for accelerated operations. So that said, not all SSDs are created equal. And just because a board supports Gen 4.0, PCIe, it doesn't mean that the SSD is actually going to clock at that speed. So that's important to remember. In fact, there's actually a lot of factors involved, and all you need to know, without going into too much detail, the purpose of this review is that Venom uses this SSD. And so I focus on this because the bottleneck for a lot of computing tasks doesn't really correspond anymore to just the processor. And it's probably more to do with the internet connection that you might be on, or maybe some of the programs that you've got running, or even how much RAM that you have available and what type of storage drive and its configuration, namely SSD. So here you have the best, right? So moving on to the RAM then, on paper everything is DDR4, but not all RAM is the same. So high performing memory empowers effectively faster, more powerful solutions. So the Samsung DDR4 that Venom use in their BlackBooks, including the BlackBook Zero 15 Phantom, delivers the top speed with the better bandwidth and reliability, using ultimately the less energy as well. So here you've then got the fastest memory with twice the bandwidth compared to the previous generations of DDR3. But the main point here is that the energy consumption that is basically the contributing factor to battery life. And so with 25% less energy consumption, every little bit counts, especially in a 15-inch ultra portable, because the BlackBook Zero 15 Phantom has removable and upgradable sodium memory slots. So the memory can be upgraded. Now, this is a big difference when you compare it to the Lenovo X1, especially the Carbon, the Dell XPS, the Surface Pro, the HP Dragonfly, or even the MacBook Air, all of which they have their memory soldered into the board. This matters, right? Because that means you'll have a notebook that you cannot upgrade. And basically, you can't get any more out of it. So from the day you bought it, buy it, it's then downhill from there. And so, with the BlackBook Zero 15 Phantom, the model that starts with the i7 processor, which is the Quantum Edition, allows you to then upgrade in the future, all the way to the top. You can go the best RAM that you want, the SSD, so you can kind of have access to more storage and more memory, and essentially a faster machine in the future, extending the life of your notebook and making sure you're getting much better value for money. So this is also what makes your BlackBook worthy of a notebook. Why Venom will actually want to buy that book, the computer back from you in the future. That because in the next 7 years, if you finish with it, they can actually upgrade it. So it's actually worth money to them. So, and once they've upgraded it, of course, they can then sell it on. So look, I know none of the others allow you to ultimately do this. And this is a big deal, people, because put all of that into perspective. When deciding if sustainability matters to you, avoiding landfill and recycling is ultimately the way put forward. But nothing more is sustainable than something that doesn't actually have to be recycled in the future, especially if that's its core premise. So that's where the 15 Phantom can take a whopping 64 gigabytes of RAM. And so if 16 or 32 is okay with you right now, for tomorrow it's going to be fine, especially if you choose to upgrade. So look, performance isn't based on a single dimension. Speed is one thing, and this BlackBook Zero 15 Phantom literally has all of that. But it's going about having fast whilst being portable, whilst having a good battery life. And it's great if you're quick for a bit, but if an ultra portable has to be quick on the go, right? And baby, this thing can commute. So Venom claim up to 17 hours on apocalypse mode, and that means the screen turned down and everything turned down and turned off. Now, unless it's a zombie apocalypse, you're stuck in an airport or something, I don't really think the numbers behind this being achieved or even usable, right? But this is literally how every other manufacturer measures their performance. So, arguably Apple's battery life numbers are arguably bogus, right? Because they're done with Apple-specific apps, and whereas in reality, professionals are using Outlook, Office, Excel, Word, PowerPoint, right? And these are ultimately the applications which matter. And so you're probably going to have a wireless connection on as well, and also you've got the screen, so you can bloody well see it. So the MacBook Pro 15 has got about 7 to 8 hours only with those kind of sort of settings. The MacBook Air, about 12 hours at around 150 nits brightness. And again, you might get about 14 hours, you may get 10 hours of it. It's kind of very application specific. And then you've got the Lenovo X1, the Carbon 14, on these battery settings will give you about 15 hours, which is obviously an improvement. And then you've got the Dell XPS 13, which will give you about 10, and the Microsoft Surface about 14 hours. So, the 014 Phantom quotes up to 30 hours on apocalypse mode, but you can get about 18 hours if you set it up properly. So, the amazing thing here in all of this is that the 015 Phantom, you can get about 12 hours, and that's huge for a 15-inch computer, right? It's portable, and especially if that's important to you, that really matters. And to all of you AMD fans out there, and the Ryzen 7 processor will drop about 50% in performance when you unplug it from the mains. And so you're still not going to perform as well as the Intel Core i7 processor in the BlackBook 015 Phantom, which will drop about 20% in performance when you unplug it. Now, remember these numbers when talking performance, because performance means a lot of things, because a performance laptop has to still perform when it's unplugged from the mains. Now, in terms of the ports on the 015 Phantom, I cover this extensively on the 014 Phantom review. So you can check there on the other video if that's something you want to go into more detail. But on the right here, you have the first one, which is in the corner, closest point to the screen, the Kensington lock slot for a locking mechanism. A full-size RG45 network connection for old school secure kind of internet connection up to 1,000 gigabytes. And this little flap will open and allow you to connect the cable, but be careful on this one because you can actually break the connection if you yank it out. So, the reason for it is basically because the BlackBook is actually thinner than the port. So anyway, that's why it's adaptable. Next, you've got the power button, which is pretty straightforward and often better here because you don't actually going to end up hitting it whilst you're typing or something like that. Then you've got the USB 2.0 for things like the mice or a keyboard, something like that. A micro SD port for the drones, cameras, phones, or whatever you might have. And then you've got the 3.5mm mic or headphone jack for speakers, mic, or a headset that you might be using for conference calls, or even maybe gaming. So, then on the left-hand side, you've got the hinge. You've got the dedicated power jack, which is connecting. You've got two chargers which come with the computer. So you can keep one at work and one for home, which is super convenient. You've then got a full-sized HDMI port for the projectors or a TV or a monitor, and then you've got a USB 3.2 backwards compatible port. So a USB Type-C port and another USB Type-C Thunderbolt 4 port for all of the Thunderbolt magic you might need. You can also run two external monitors off this at the same time, using the HDMI port and the USB Type-C Thunderbolt port to have two external 4K monitors. So if you use external monitors, studies basically show that productivity can be increased by up to 50%. And it's a great way to have a desktop ergonomically in a portable computer. That's how I do it a lot these days. And the back is where the exhaust outlets are, so at no point do you have any of the air blowing onto your lap or anything like that, which is super handy. And the latest Intel Wi-Fi 6 card is also included, so you can still get high-speed wireless data even if there are a lot of people connecting to the same wireless router as you, or if they're on at the same time. And so here you have basically a smarter, a faster, intelligent 15-inch all-purpose high-performance notebook computer. And so the question is, should you buy it? Well, I can't think of a reason not to. The answer for me is definitely a yes. And you're going to be super hard pressed to find a machine that offers better value, better performance, and better portability that kind of whole package. And it's the performance that this type of trade-in program also as well means that you've got a guaranteed valuable product in the future. So you can order from the Shop Venom website wherever you are, and if you're in the US or Canada and the EU or even New Zealand, UK, wherever you might be, you just pay in your native currency. So there's no kind of like conversion fees or anything like that. You basically get then the DHL express delivery, and it will just turn up, you know, usually a day or two later. So look, I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thanks so much for getting to this point. And if you did enjoy it, please make sure you hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe. And we'll see you next time on a deep dive.